And, he was like, I'm just so tired. I'm just so tired. And he said, but also like, and it becomes this human dignity space. He said, I've never begged anybody for anything in my life. And it is hard for me to think about begging for my life.
Hey everyone, it's Khadidah, and I am so excited to talk about this interview that I got to do with Robin Rocky Myers. If you don't know who Rocky is, he is a man who was unfortunately sentenced on death row for a crime that he did not commit. And so there have been his team of lawyers and investigators that have been able to exonerate him, essentially. He was most recently granted clemency by Governor Kay Ivey, and no one has been granted clemency since 1981, I believe. And this was such an honor to do because we actually had this conversation a few days prior to the governor granting him that. So I felt so honored to be able to do this interview with him. Major shout out to his lawyer, Kacey Keeton. Major shout out to his investigator, Miriam Bankston. And a huge shout out to everyone else who has not only heard his story from across the world, but who has really supported him and sent him love throughout these long years of his time on death row for something he didn't do. So I'm super excited to show you guys an interview.
Hi,
How
how
are
you doing?
you? I'm doing good. I'm very appreciative of you coming on and being able to talk to me today.
Oh, yeah, cool. That's
Yeah.
nice. That's good.
I heard that you are a Gators fan and not Roll Tide.
Yeah, well, see, that's not altogether true. I love
Okay.
Alabama.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
love that. I would like to see Alabama beat everybody except my
It's
Gators. That's how that goes.
That's
I
how that
love Alabama.
goes.
Yeah, that's not my team though. To see where I come from, we really didn't do college. We
Yeah.
did NFL. And so
Yeah.
when I came down here, I became a Gator fan. And
Yeah.
I like Alabama too, but that's why I became a Gator fan. You got to get a team.
Okay.
In here you have to have a team, especially
Right.
if you're gonna be, especially if you're gonna be rooting against someone else's team.
Mm-hmm.
And so give them the opportunity to root against your team. You got to get a team.
Yeah.
That was up.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, you say NFL. What NFL teams do you like?
Oh, geez, Johnny. Yeah, they sorry, they suck, but those are my boys. New York Giants. I'm New York every. Yeah,
Giants.
I'm New York Yankees. That's my team. The
Okay.
Yankees, New York Knicks. That's my
Okay.
team, and then the Florida Gators.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and college basketball is Georgetown. They just gave me that team. I didn't have a college basketball team because I kind of like everybody except a couple teams I don't like.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
College basketball is awesome.
Yeah.
So
I was worried you
yeah.
when I asked you about NFL. I was worried you was gonna say Dallas Cowboys. As long as you didn't say the Cowboys, we
Oh my
good. We good.
God, no, God, no. Oh no, and I don't. And the key part is I dislike Dallas way more than I do Philly. And it
Oh.
shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. It should be Philly should be my number one nemesis. Then the Cowboys and but no, I can't stand Dallas, and I don't like Dallas now.
Yeah.
Maybe they fool.
Yeah.
They do big stakes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I get that. I get
And
that.
I like sports. I'm not a big sports head though. Like a lot of guys sit around and talk sports,
Hmm.
about players and old players and all that stuff. I don't do that.
Yeah.
I just like my team
Yeah.
and I hope they keep winning or start winning with the Giants. Yeah. So, yeah.
I feel it. I feel it.
Hey, Rocky, it's
Yeah.
Miriam.
Hey, what's up there, little sis? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just taking it easy. Enjoying my retirement.
Yeah, you did. You
You know,
retired. Congratulations.
about to fix me something to eat later. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah. So, but uh,
if it's all right with you, Khadidah's gonna ask you just like a few questions. Is that okay?
yeah, of course, of course.
Wonderful.
Okay. So, like I said, thank you so much for coming on here. We're getting your story out because the more people that know about it, the better.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You're welcome.
Yeah. So my first question is, how do you, how do you maintain hope in your current situation? What does that look like for you?
I didn't understand the last part. How do I what?
How do you maintain hope and like strength and in your current
Oh,
situation? What does that look like for you?
well, first and foremost, I'm a Christian,
Amen.
and I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And so that's where my hope lies in that. And as far as like my attitude and all that, I get that from the people that's in my life, And then I tell people all the time that I have to try to do good and be good because I have kids and I have to get on them. And how can I get on them if I'm not doing what I should be doing, things like that. And plus, it's really my background. I had a grandmother, my grandma Aileen, and she always tried to teach us morals and be upstanding and honest and all that stuff like that. And I tell people I am who she wants me to be right now. I wasn't when I was younger, but I am now as I done got older. I can see things more better and clearly, the rights and the wrongs, even though you knew it back then, but we didn't follow that. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I keep my home alive because of those reasons. You know,
Yeah. I
short
love that.
on that.
Yeah.
Well,
And you spoke about, your family. Are they you would consider them your biggest support system?
do I do what?
Would you could like consider them your biggest support system and during these
Oh yeah,
times?
yeah. Oh, of course. I have a son out there, my oldest boy, Leandro, and he he's a trooper for real, And all my kids are, you know, um, is supporting me and rooting for me and everything like that. But um, we don't be in communication like me and my oldest boy do.
Mm-hmm.
Me and him, we communicate all the time. Several times a week, and so my brother Jeffrey, and he lives up there in Pennsylvania, and I have sisters that support me and everything like that. I have one auntie that's alive. Everybody else is gone, and she supports me and stuff. So my family, yes, they do support me, and they do want me to come home.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a strength for me too. I take my strength from them. Especially my brother Jeffrey. Talking to him yesterday, and he was really upset about what's going on with me right now. And he's the big brother.
Yeah.
And so he has the right to be upset in things. And he still keeps on me. You should have never took your butt down there. We told you don't go down there. Blah 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 that there.
Yeah.
And I know my family loves me and
Absolutely.
care about me and want the
Absolutely.
best for me. I know that.
Absolutely. Yeah. You spoke about, obviously coming home. What is something that you would want people to just understand about your, experience within the justice system right now?
I really don't. My experience, and I would like people to understand, I think is just be who you are, and regardless of what's going on in your life, I believe, and I've been saying that there's people just worse off than me, and it's people that's all over the United States and in other countries that falsely arrested and put in prison and stuff like that, and they stay locked up, until, whenever they get out or if they get out.
Yeah.
And so my experience is just to be who you are and try to take care of people as best you can where you are, and there's people in here that I know that kind of not there all the way mentally and stuff like that. And I try to love on them and help them and support them and keep them up and just be who you are. Don't change. When I first got locked up back in the day, I was in the county jail and I just knew I was going home anyway. This ain't gonna stick and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was acting like a youngster, pants sagging on my behind and smoking cigarettes. I never ever did drugs while I was incarcerated. Now, before I got incarcerated, I was on drugs, and the day I got locked up, at 90 or 91 or whatever, I completely stopped doing drugs. But I still had that messed up mentality in my head, being the streets and all that stuff like that. And it's gone. I grew up and I grew out of that, and hopefully other people will too.
Yeah.
In here.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you went into that, talking about what your experience was before and then how it's changed now, because my next question was going to be how has your perspective on life changed throughout this experience? But at what moment did you, switch on in your mind to say that's not who I am and I'm not going to behave that way anymore?
Well, I think the switch went on in my mind really was when my mom died. Mm. And before that, I had so much regret for leaving my mother to come to Alabama. And you just don't do that. You can move and move across town, move to another city or whatever, but you just don't leave, and come way to another state, way far away. And I left my mom. And so that was a big, big, big regret. And losing my mother, it was kind of like, man, this is ridiculous, to be down here and to be who I am. And I always knew who I was. But I ignored a lot of it. My grandma, Eileen, she tried to teach us who to be and stuff like that. And I tell people all the time, I'm a Myers. My dad's name was John. That's the tough side of me, but I'm just saying, I always knew who I was. And the eye opener is, I lost my wife and my kids. They've grown up without me. I got grandkids that I don't know them. I got a couple of them that came to see me. So I got to hug a few of them. Mm-hmm. But I got grandkids I don't even know. I haven't never even touched them. I got great grandkids now. I never even touched them. I love babies. And I would love to be out there to mold them and teach them and walk with them. And my dad used to walk with us and say, do you know them? Well, why are you looking over them? Mind your business. Stuff like that. Little things you could teach kids while they're growing up and while their mind is still soft and impressionable. And so all that type of stuff like that there made me really grow up. And like I said, I want to be the person that I could talk to my kids and my grandkids and tell them that this is wrong and that's wrong. But I can't do that if I'm smoking dope. I can't do that if I'm in some gang, which I've never been. But I can't do that if I'm a hood rat. So, I can't do that. So I need to be a good person for them, if not for me. And I want to go to heaven. I want to go to heaven. I want to see Christ.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna have one last question. And so it's a lot of people that listen to this show. So I just want to know, how can they support you, or what does that look like, or what do you want them to know? We know that you're innocent in this situation, and your child did not, in my opinion, in our opinion, it wasn't fair. And so what is it, something that you want them to know, as it pertains to this, your life, this case, and all those
The
things.
biggest thing I would like for people to do for me is pray. Pray for me. Pray for my strength in the Lord. Pray that I would just keep growing in Christ and in the Word of God, and just I'm okay, with because if it's God's will, it's God's will. Now, don't get me wrong. I want out of here. I want off of death row, all that stuff like that. But I would never say that, I damn this and damn that. If it's God's will, it's God's will. But I'm okay, and I love. Thank you for the support, and it's kind of like I have an extended family, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that's support me. I love it. It's good, but what can I do and what can I say? But thank you.
Yeah.
And, I'm okay. I'm being strong with whatever, whatever comes my way, standing up to it.
Yeah. Well, I definitely continue to pray for you and continue to pray for your strength in the Lord. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me this time to talk to you. And I'm going to pass it to Kacey and Miriam if they want to say anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
was all mine.
Thank you.
Call me tomorrow.
Say that again.
I said, call me tomorrow, and we'll talk and catch up.
All right. You okay?
I'm good.
Okay. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you for everything.
Hold on, Miriam's
All
going to
right.
say something.
Rocky,
Okay.
we're gonna keep praying and hoping and fighting, right?
It is. Of course. Scorched earth.
Yeah.
There it is.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, I do. Scorched earth. That's cool, man. That's like a superhero or something like that doing something. Oh, scorched earth. It's cool, man. That was cool.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you guys for everything. You made my day. Like I said, I quit the job here, so today is like my first day of retirement. I've been doing good all day, but I haven't smiled like this today. Like you guys make me smile. So, thank you for that. And I'll call tomorrow around 2:00, I guess. This seems like our normal time now.
Actually, call
Around 2
a
o'clock.
little before 2. Call like you did today. Like call around 1:30.
Okay. All right. I'll try.
I just want to say, Rocky, you made my day. I really appreciate how strong you are in this time and how you're really leaning on the Lord to get you through these moments and these times. So I just want to say you made my day as much as I made yours. So thank you.
Thank you. You be blessed.
You
God
too.
bless y'all.
You
All
too.
right. Love you, fam. Talk to you later.
Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we're going to transition into the actual episode where we talk about Rocky's case. If you're wondering, what did he do? How did he get there? I know I spoke about death row. Well, this is how you're going to find out. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Set in Stone, where we are setting in stone the foundational principles of all things related to social justice, government, politics. This is our The South Got Something to Say series. And today I am super excited about today's episode. So before we get started, I would love to introduce our guest, Miriam Bankston and Kacey Keeton. And before we get started, I'm just going to read their bios and introduce who they are. So I'm going to start with Miriam. So Miriam Bankston is a dedicated mitigation specialist and social worker with 5 years of experience, currently serving as a chief investigator. Known for her dynamic leadership and unwavering commitment to her clients, Miriam has set new standards for mitigation investigation in her unit, reshaping how case teams engage with clients and make critical decisions. She is deeply committed to ensuring that clients and their humanity remain at the center of their cases. Miriam earned her bachelor's degree in criminal justice and criminology from Arizona State University in 2014 and began her career at a Level 1 residential treatment center in Phoenix, working with adolescents facing complex mental health, behavioral, and emotional challenges, including trauma, substance abuse, and sexually maladaptive behaviors. While working there, she pursued her master's in social work at Arizona State, earning a specialized certification in treating sexually abusive youth through the Kemp Center at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. After completing her MSW, she spent a year as a therapist for adolescents with sexually maladaptive behaviors, receiving additional training in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and play therapy. Since moving to Alabama in 2019, Miriam has worked as an investigator, earning a forensic social work certification from the National Organization of Forensic Social Work. Now leading the unit as chief investigator, she brings a nuanced, trauma-informed approach to her work with clients and their families while fostering culturally responsive practices within her team. A dedicated mentor, she's provided guidance on casework and team dynamics, supporting the growth of diverse mitigation specialists. And in 2021 and 2022, Miriam was a participant in the ACLU's Charlotte Holman Mitigation Mentorship Program and has become a recognized leader in the field. She frequently conducts workshops and trainings at both national and local levels on client-centered communication, trauma-informed advocacy, and navigating complex mental health diagnosis. In 2024, she was honored with the Emerging Leader Award from Advancing Real Change, recognizing her as a mitigation specialist who represents the future of the profession. Always striving for growth, Miriam remains dedicated to improving her skills, supporting her clients, and elevating the field of mitigation personally, where she is committed to supporting changes that make carceral systems obsolete. Thank you for being here, Miriam.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and now I'm going to introduce Kacey Keeton. So Kacey Keeton graduated with her bachelor's degree in journalism from Mississippi University for Women. She received her law degree from the University of Alabama. While there, she received the ACLU award for her work on an appeal for a death row inmate. Following law school, Kacey clerked for Chief Justice James Smith on Mississippi Supreme Court, and she worked as an associate at Brunini, Grantham, and Gower and Hughes in Jackson, Mississippi. She became an assistant federal defender with the Federal Defender's Office in the Middle District of Alabama in 2007 and is currently the senior litigator for the office. Kacey primarily works in the capital habeas unit, representing individuals on Alabama's death row. She also works on the trial side, representing indigent clients charged with federal crimes. Wow, I have two dynamic women today, and I'm so excited to just talk with y'all about criminal justice system in Alabama, but particularly the case that you guys are working on with Robin Rocky Myers. So I'm going to pass it over to whoever would like to start by answering the first question of, who is Robin Rocky Myers, and can you tell me about his case?
Rocky is a son. He is a father to 4 children and has a host of grandchildren. He is an innocent man that is incarcerated on death row in Alabama, and he's been there for 31 years.
Rocky is our friend. He is a client, but he is also a friend. I have represented Rocky since I started in the office, so for over 17 years.
Wow.
He has become a lot more like family in many ways. We have sat in the homes of his children and sat with him at Holman for so many times talking about his case and those things, but also just about life and about his personal experiences. Sad things, happy things, funny things. I think, one of the things that I always like to include about him in talking about him is he's a huge sports fan. He loves the New York Yankees and the New York Giants religiously. And he also is, in being in the South, he adopted the Florida Gators as his college football team.
What? Not Alabama?
I know. And I think it's because he hears too much Alabama down at Holman. He is a really amazing human. He loves music, and actually from childhood, his family had a gospel band that they put together. So he has always been involved with music and around music, and it centers him. His oldest son, Leandrew, actually plays the drums, just like Rocky did.
I love that.
So a huge family connection. And I think the tragedy in all of this, in a multitude of tragedies, I think one of the biggest tragedies is that his children have been robbed of their father for over 30 years. And I think we see that across the criminal justice system, where families are broken up, not always because of something that happened in the home, but because of the incarceration system that we have that makes it impossible for families to keep together in the most ideal ways by charging exorbitant fees to have phone calls, distance, or creating obstacles for visits themselves in person.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, Rocky has really maintained and developed deep relationships with his children.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I was able to not only watch the documentary, but like just read all the articles that you both sent me in regards to the case. And so this case, I mean, it's a case like with pretty much zero physical evidence, correct? And no witness that actually saw him committing this crime, and no confession, right? So how does a case like this, I mean, even make it to trial, let alone result in a death sentence?
I wish I could say that it's really rare, but I don't think it is all the time. And, some of it is that there is this innate belief, in spite of this ideal of you are innocent until proven guilty in these spaces. I think we still have so many people who come into the system and they believe that if someone has been arrested and they've been charged and we're now at trial, I think there's just this implicit bias that there must be something here.
Yeah.
And, in Rocky's case, I think there are several markers that for us stand out as how did we get here?
Yeah.
And one of the basic ones to me is that Rocky lived across the street from the victim, Miss Ludi Mae Tucker. And he had been by her house to borrow ice. Their home didn't have a working freezer at one point. So he had gone over there to borrow ice. They had engaged in conversations, that, hi, how are you, across the street neighbor. And yet when Miss Tucker, we know kind of what happened in the house because Miss Dutton, who is Miss Tucker's cousin, was actually there and asleep in the room near the front door. So we know kind of what that exchange between the person who committed this crime and Mrs. Tucker because of Mrs. Dutton. So we know that this person came to the door, knocking on the door and saying, I need to use your phone because I've had a car accident. I need to contact my family. So I think like this natural first red flag is if that person on the other side of the door is Rocky Myers, Mrs. Tucker would know, why does he need to use the phone to contact his family? He lives across the street.
Right.
I know he doesn't have a car. All of these things that would have like risen the level of suspicion for her.
Yeah.
Yet she continues at the door talking to this person and offering, yes, you can use the phone. But Mrs. Dutton recognizes a space where Mrs. Tucker started to feel some kind of worry because she next says to the person at the door, I need you to quiet down. You're going to wake my husband. Well, Mrs. Tucker was not married. So Mrs. Dutton took that as kind of like, okay, there's something negative that's now taking place.
Right.
But again, also, Mrs. Tucker was Mr. Myers' neighbor. So why would she tell this obvious lie in that space?
Right.
Again, like that is to ward off a stranger.
Right.
Not someone who knows you and who lives across the street from you.
Right.
Then, at that point, the person comes through the door, stabs Mrs. Tucker. He then goes into the next room and stabs Mrs. Dutton. But Mrs. Tucker lives long enough to make a 911 call where she gives a physical description of the person who attacked her. She doesn't say it was my neighbor. She doesn't say it was the guy across the street. She doesn't say it was Rocky Myers.
Yeah.
All things that she knew.
Yeah.
She then lives long enough to give, again, a physical description to the people who arrive with 911. Again, she doesn't say it was my neighbor. She doesn't say it was the guy across the street. She doesn't say it was Rocky Myers.
Right.
Both of those times where she is cognizant enough and aware enough to give a description, to name the person who attacked her, never does she say it was my neighbor.
Right.
She later succumbed to her injuries at the hospital. Mrs. Dutton never saw the man other than to say, and she testified at trial that he sounded black.
Okay.
Literally, that was the testimony.
All right. So I have a question. Oh, wait, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna ask. So obviously, Rocky knew the woman, but like in the investigation, how did the prosecution explain why someone who showed such consistent kindness to his neighbor would suddenly turn violent? Like, what was the prosecution's argument for this in their theory?
I mean, they didn't. I don't even feel like they acknowledged it at all. There is testimony from a police officer who says in his testimony, I believe his words were, she never indicated that she knew the suspect.
Yeah.
But it's established that they knew each other from them living across the street.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think, that's kind of this common sense space that I think sometimes gets lost in the law, right?
Yeah.
That those are things that should have been hammered over and over again. This is not the person who did this for these very basic reasons.
Yeah.
Then we get into the space of the lack of physical evidence. There was a palm print on Mrs. Tucker's door. That palm print did not match Rocky Myers.
Oh, wow.
We know at the time, and the police even commented on it in their interview notes from their meeting with Rocky, that he had horrible sloughing eczema at the time, which means if he is committing this violent offense where he is stabbing two women and entering this home, he would have left skin behind. There's no way that he would not have. We don't have that as forensic evidence. We don't have any indication that there was that skin on Mrs. Tucker, on Mrs. Dutton, in the house.
Yeah.
Then the person who committed this crime also ripped a VCR from the wall and took it. Remember, this is 1991. VCRs were a little bit more of a high commodity at that point.
Yeah.
But again, these violent acts are taking place in this very short span of time. And someone with that condition would have left forensic evidence behind. It wasn't there.
Yeah, would have, definitely. One of the other things that I know that, was, I guess, not used in his favor, if I'm wording it correctly, is his intellectual disability. Can you guys talk about that?
It was never brought up at all. And I think it's something that absolutely impacted Rocky from the arrest forward. He has a police interview where he is uncounseled, and we know things. The Supreme Court has recognized that individuals with intellectual disability are more likely to seek out to be people pleasing, to kowtow to authority figures.
Yeah.
So you have this intellectually disabled man who is confronted and sitting there talking to police officers about a very serious crime, and he does those things. He does want to people please. He wants to give them answers to the questions that they're asking.
Yeah.
Even still, in that space and time, he never confessed to a murder.
Yeah.
He always maintained his innocence in that space, but he still tried to answer questions.
Yeah.
Where I think it's very clear he was just trying to answer questions, not because they were real answers for him in those spaces. And again, they're asking him a month away from this crime. Like, where were you that night? What were you doing? Did you have this VCR ever? Did you trade a VCR for drugs? These kind of things. And, he tried to answer those. And I think he tried to fill in blanks for things that he hoped to satisfy and to move forward and past this so that they would understand that he did not commit this crime.
Right. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I think that's our first episode where intellectual disability comes into play. But then he has this lawyer who ignores the fact that he has an intellectual disability. And I say ignores, he doesn't even seek to find out. And I think we know through interviews with them that he did not connect with Rocky in that way. He was very dismissive of Rocky. I think we'll probably talk about other reasons for that in a minute. But, then he put Rocky on the stand, like a client with intellectual disability, putting him on the stand, subjecting them to cross-examination in that space. You just don't do that unless you have really prepared someone, and someone with those levels of cognitive impairments. Again, it's just, I don't think it's good lawyering in that space to do that. So really the first person who ever kind of delved into this, the intellectual disability issues, are when he came to the Federal Defender's Office in 2005. And that was really the first time anybody was paying attention to that at all. And by then he had been failed at the trial level, in his state post-conviction level, and in spaces where, he could not fully engage and interact because of his impairments.
Yeah. So Miriam, in the documentary, we still talking about intellectual disability. The family testified that like he had issues doing basic life things growing up due to that intellectual disability. So like, how did prosecutors manage to convince the jury that the same person who had trouble doing basic life things could plan and execute a murder such as this?
Yeah, and I think, the second part of that question about how the prosecution was able to, convince a jury otherwise, like, I think that's a great question that actually highlights the failure of trial counsel, because nobody even raised it. So at the time of his trial, no one knew that he had this intellectual disability, despite the fact that there were records and documents and family members that could have spoke to or testified to the fact that he had an intellectual disability. So they didn't even really have to convince anybody, because nobody even cared to bring it up or to look into it.
Yeah.
And as far as, yes, in the documentary, his family talks about a lot of the daily living skills that Rocky has struggled with in the free world. And, that is hygiene, that is cooking meals, that is, just your daily life tasks that he was not able to do at all, or not able to do them without help.
Yeah. So, and this is for like both of y'all, whoever. So when you look at all these factors together, the lack of evidence, the intellectual disability, and his positive relationship he had with the victim, what do you guys feel like this tells us about a system that's supposed to be designed to serve?
I think it tells us what we already know and what can be supported by data and statistics, and that is that the death penalty is arbitrary.
Yeah.
I think that what happened, and again, what we know, is that when the victim of a murder is white, you are more likely to get the death penalty.
Yeah.
And so in this situation, they have arrested somebody, they have charged them with capital murder, and they have sat them on death row for over 30 years, and they're still planning to execute him. And I think it's just to the point that, well, a white person died and a black person has to pay.
Yeah. Can you tell me about his trial attorney during the time of his case?
Yeah, so his trial attorney was a local attorney indicator. We always knew that this attorney had represented the United Klans of America group, which is an offshoot or a group belonging to the Ku Klux Klan. So we always have known that he was a lawyer for them and represented them in different litigation. But we recently found out, which we always suspected, right, but we weren't able to prove it, found news articles of this lawyer attending Klan rallies. And I mean full-blown, cross-burning Klan rallies with other members of the Ku Klux Klan, high-ranking members, saying the N-word and saying, telling people to pick up arms and prepare for a race war. And so that's one of the consequences of not having a public-wide defender system in Alabama, or statewide public defender system in Alabama, is now that this black man is his representation is being handled by a man who was a member of the Klan.
Yeah. And you can't tell me that he could separate him being a Klan member and then having the opportunity, he sees it as an opportunity to send a black man to jail. That would be his lifelong dream. If he can't lynch him, he would send him to jail.
Well, then even the language that he used at Rocky's trial was very much so in a way to like further isolate Rocky from his jury that consisted of 11 white people. He said things like the place where Rocky lived was like the pit of hell, and that no decent person would ever go there. And I'm sorry I even have to tell all of you good people about this horrible place that this man comes from. He called him a street person and said he didn't have any clean clothes or anything like that is how he spoke about this man. And he's supposed to be fighting for his life.
And I think you can really substitute every time he said decent people, you could just put in the word white.
Yeah, that's what he meant for real.
And
yeah.
Interestingly, one of the articles, and Miriam is responsible for discovering all of these articles. So I want to be very clear, like the importance of a really great investigator. But one of the articles actually is him using language talking about good, decent people, that we need to protect good, decent people. And again, I think you substitute in the word white in there, but that language then mirrored in the way he talks to the jury in Rocky Myers' case, I think is just this clear line of who he is.
Yeah, essentially.
And you have a poor man who doesn't get a choice of an attorney, and that's what the state provides to him, is someone who uses the N-word, who participates heavily in a hate organization.
Yeah.
And that's what he's left with.
Which I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question was going to be, as the investigator, when you first realized that like the complete absence of evidence against Rocky, what was your initial reaction? Was it the reaction you just basically said about, if a white person dies, a black person has to pay? Was that your?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I came on to Rocky's case later, as to where Kacey has worked on it for 17 years, and a lot of this evidence was already known. So Rocky's case is actually one of those that when people start in the office, or law students, whatever, it's a case that we highlight because it's like, this will motivate you. Right. And so when I learned about everything that had happened and not having experience in this work, it was like kind of common sense to like, how is this man still on death row?
Yeah.
And I'm like, how does anybody rationalize and justify the fact that this man has been in prison for, at that point, it hadn't been 30 years, but, here we are, it's been 30 years. And, I understand, I guess, that there's legal reasons for that.
Yeah.
But it's just this kind of common sense part that takes over you. And then that's when you realize this is all arbitrary. It's just shocking. I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah, for sure. Kacey, like Miriam said, you have been on this case for 17 years. Can you just kind of walk us through, I guess, what it is a challenge, what the day-to-day challenges have been throughout your years of working on the case?
I think that from jump, there is this frustration that it is this person that you just have zero doubt is not guilty. And that the system is so stacked against him. From when we come onto the case, the Federal Defender's Office had the case for a couple of years before I joined the office, and we got it. And I think this is another level of awful in a parade of awfuls in his case, is that while he was doing his state post-conviction, he was abandoned by counsel.
Oh, wow.
So in the middle of appeals in that space, his attorney just walked away. He didn't tell Rocky that he was quitting. He didn't tell the court he was quitting. He didn't tell the Attorney General's office he was quitting.
Where did he go?
To a different law firm. Honestly, this is the...
I didn't even know you could do that. That's like quitting your just walking off of the job.
You can't. It is unethical and it is problematic, and it happens more than you think to poor people. And that, goes to a much larger problem in this space. Is as a poor person in the system, you get what they give you. And in Alabama, with no statewide public defender system. At the time that this happened, and even now, most counties do not have a public defender system. So he's appointed counsel, which we know in this case has its own problems. But same thing for his state post conviction. He gets a volunteer lawyer, and this volunteer lawyer was, when he took the volunteer position, was at a law firm that was comfortable with pro bono work and doing public service. In the middle of his representation of Rocky, he moves to a law firm that is less good with pro bono work.
Yeah.
And so instead of doing what he should have done, which is notify the court, notify the client, this is now something that I can no longer do. Now, frankly, what the court would have said is you can't walk away at this point. That is generally what would have happened.
Okay.
But so he just did it on his own without notifying anyone. The first time Rocky is even made aware of that situation is when he gets a letter from the Attorney General's office saying, hey, you've missed your deadline to file appeals. We're going to move forward and set an execution date for you if you don't do something. And so Rocky, who reads at a 4th grade level, could not even read that letter. He had to have a friend of his on the road read him that letter. That friend at the time was represented by another organization in the state. And they contacted the Federal Defender's Office and said, can you take this client? So literally in 30 days, the folks at the Federal Defender's Office prepared an extensive federal habeas petition.
Wow.
Which is a huge thing. Like that would normally take months and months and months to put together and to do investigation and all these things. And it really was like this rallied resources together to get it filed. But the problem is it was still filed too late, which is why Rocky has never had his claims fully heard in court, like his appeal claims.
Yeah.
Because of that, because of this abandonment by counsel.
Yeah.
So it's this frustration of, like, here's this poor man who is intellectually disabled. He is a black man sitting in front of a jury of 11 white people and 1 black person.
Yeah.
Then he is abandoned by counsel during his state post-conviction. And now because of that abandonment, he is being held responsible for missing that deadline. Like, it is unfair on top of unfair on top of unfair. And they are going to take his life for it.
Yeah.
So that is, like, to me, that continues to be this obstacle of managing anger and incredulity and all of those things and frustrations without, like, just screaming at people. Like, how do you miss this? How do you not get that this is wrong?
Right. Exactly.
And so I do a lot of therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's real. This is heavy. I mean, it's heavy work. It's
It's work that is heavy on your heart. It is heavy on your mind. And because we're also having to talk to the family who wants to know why, who wants to understand. And again, like, kind of we go back in this space in Rocky's case, even the jury that convicted him voted for him to have a life sentence.
Yeah.
And, the judge, because the law at the time overrode it, to give him death. So you have family members who are like, I still don't get that part. I don't understand how a single judge can overturn this, and he's the reason that my dad is on death row.
Yeah.
Like, and, you can't, it's like, make it make sense, and sometimes you just can't.
Yeah. Sometimes you just can't. How does Alabama's elected judicial system impact death penalty cases? I'm sure is Rocky an anomaly, or I'm sure there are other cases out there where jurors have given people life sentences and a judge has overrode it and said no, death.
Yeah, until 2016, like in this window of time, 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court came down with a decision in a case called Hearst. And that was related to Florida's death penalty system that allowed for judicial override. And they found it unconstitutional in Hearst.
Wow. Okay.
So that happens in 2016. And at that time, in 2016, only 3 states allowed for judicial override: Delaware, Florida, and Alabama.
Oh, wow.
Florida and Delaware had a pretty structured system. And actually, for the 15 years prior to 2016, Florida and Delaware had only used judicial override to override from death to life. So judges were only using it to give somebody a life sentence. Alabama was the only state that was regularly using judicial override to sentence people to death.
Wow.
In 2017, Alabama changed the law and adopted a structured sentencing that required the jury to no longer make a recommendation. The jury's verdict in regard to a death sentence or a life without parole sentence is the actual sentence that's received. Unfortunately, they chose not to make that law retroactive when they did it, leaving at the time in 2017, I think about 35, 36 people on death row that were there only because of judicial override. So Rocky was one of those 30-plus people and continues to be. They have since executed at least two people that were there because of judicial override, Ron Smith and Kenny Smith.
Yeah.
And so it's not an anomaly in many ways. There's a judge who's, I think he's deceased now, but he was a judge out of Mobile, Farrell McRae, who overrode, I think, almost every time he had a case in front of him, but at least 6 cases, he overrode life without parole sentences to death.
Wow.
And, of the 33, I believe, gentlemen that are still on death row due to judicial override, the majority of them are black.
Yeah.
And if you look at, like, the all-time list, like, black people were subject to judicial override more. And in Alabama, as you mentioned, judges are elected officials, and they run, on certain platforms. And one of those platforms is going to be tough on crime. And who's tougher on crime than a judge that, supports the death penalty, has no problem imposing the death penalty, and has no problem overriding a life sentence to death?
Right. Because Alabama does have one of the highest per capita, like, death row populations. And I think this just shows the racial disparities that, exist within our justice system, which is going to lead me to the next question. So Alabama, as we know, recently allocated $400 million in COVID funds for prison construction. How do these decisions, in y'all's opinion, reflect the state's priorities to justice reform?
It's leaning into the false promise. This false promise that somehow incarceration makes us safer, that stiff penalties makes us safer, whereas they think people that work day to day within the systems, not just the criminal justice system, but the larger systems, I think recognize that if we took that money and we put it into schools, if we put it into education, if we put it into mental health care, if we put it into health care, that is where you make a difference. That is how you make communities safer, stronger, better.
Right. Miriam, did you want to answer?
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm probably gonna sound like a conspiracy theorist, but building this prison, right? If we look at the state of Alabama prisons and what they have been, they're overcrowded.
Yep.
The conditions are horrible, but in addition to them being overcrowded, then we have to look at parole rates and how frequently parole is being denied.
Yeah.
Well, if you need, overcrowded prisons to justify your new prison, it affects everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I'm glad you talked about. We have to look at the parole, how often people are being let out on parole. My next question goes to, what immediate changes in Alabama's legal system could, just change and or prevent these situations from happening?
It's so broad, like everything that needs to happen, because you know what I believe, it's not enough for me to say I'm against the death penalty if I'm not supporting things that keep people out of jail, out of prison, and off death row.
Yeah.
And that is Medicaid expansion, that is better funded schools, right? That is access to mental health care, all of these things, because at the end of the day, death penalty is the ultimate consequence of a system of societal failures.
Yeah.
And so many other things need to change and be different, but really it's investing in communities of care.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Kacey, do you?
I think that it goes to, we talk about education and like building better schools, better students, better educated population. But that education goes to like having people really understand what happens in the systems that we have. You don't care about something until it directly impacts you in so many ways.
Right.
And so like educating people, exposing people to where their tax dollars are actually going, what is actually happening, I think is incredibly important. And again, I'm going to harp back on a statewide public defender system. As long as we are working in these spaces, how can you best equip people who are going through the system? It's by giving them proper representation.
Yeah.
And a statewide public defender system allows an office that solely focuses on that group of clients, and it has resources within it. I think that the really great holistic defense services, Jefferson County has a really great public defender system now, but it's only been in existence for a little over 10 years, I think, 10, 15 years maybe. Montgomery County now has one. Ilea McKee is the public defender there. They have in-house social workers. They have investigators on staff. Like, that's a full-service space, whereas when you are operating in counties where there's not that statewide public defender system, and you just have a contract lawyer that's appointed, he has to go back to the court and say, can a pretty please have some money for an investigator? Can a pretty please have some money for an expert?
Oh, wow.
And it's the judge that's making those decisions.
Wow. That's such a huge barrier.
It absolutely is.
That's
a barrier
a
to
huge
resources.
barrier.
Time and time again in our cases, we find all this evidence after the fact, and we're like, why wasn't this discovered at trial? And a lot of times the attorney didn't know to do it, because capital casework is really intense, and it's just different, and there's a lot more. And a lot of times people don't know what they're supposed to be doing, but a lot of times I've seen cases where they tried to get money and they tried to get funds, and they were denied by the court.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
you learn something new every day. I didn't know it was such a huge barrier, like to ask, I need this money to make sure that this person is innocent. Yeah. And we go by what you said, it's that failed promise of like people are proven innocent until guilty, but it's like, how can I properly prove that if I have to go to the court to ask for money to get the investigator, ask for money to get, what else did you say? The investigator?
Experts. Mental health, investigation, because there's a big difference between a fact investigator and a mitigation investigator. Like somebody with mitigation experience, that informs them how to talk to people, how to engage about like serious subjects that often involve trauma.
Yeah.
And families who don't share trauma easily, because when it's happening and you're in the midst of it, you don't want to talk about it. Like there's always a secret keeper, right?
Right.
In families where there's things that are really disturbing sometimes.
Right.
I really think it's important to like offer the other side of that.
Yeah.
The prosecution has the Department of Forensic Sciences. The prosecution has the police officers who are investigating the cases. They don't have to ask for anything to do their jobs and to represent the state to the best of their ability. They don't have to ask for those monies.
Right.
Whereas, again, these individual, oftentimes just solo practitioner lawyers who are taking these criminal cases have to nickel and dime and ask for everything. They have to ask to go above the rate, like to cover some extra office expenses. And sometimes those, are denied.
Yeah, that is absurd. Absurd. So I guess what can people do? What is the public's role in like bringing awareness to Rocky's case, and how can activism play into this to ensure that, because right now you guys are asking for clemency from the governor. So how can the public play a role in that?
I think I recently have just learned how important every conversation is. Any conversation anyone has about Rocky, sharing any articles about Rocky, writing a letter to the governor. You can also write letters to like your city council members or your elected officials in your county, just, those kinds of things. But even just word to mouth.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how far that has gotten us and how many doors that's opened just because somebody shared an article with somebody or, so-and-so told me about this case. It's just, and like Rocky said, praying.
Yeah.
Praying.
For sure. Kacey?
Yeah, I think that is it. It's the, we don't know until we know, right?
Yeah.
And so if we are, every conversation you have, every social media engagement you have can be an opportunity to educate somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that Rocky's case teaches us so much. And, sadly, it teaches us so much. But it's also, I think goes back to when we first found out that Rocky had lost his final appeal at the U.S. Supreme Court. I called him and to let him know, which is an awful phone call to have. Like, you want to have something like that in person. But,
Yeah.
Just the nature of that. And the first thing that he said to me on the phone was, I know that you're going to want to talk more about this, but I don't want clemency. And I said, well, we are definitely going to talk about it a lot more.
Yeah, for sure.
But can you give me like the highlights of like why? Where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I'm just so tired. I'm just so tired. And he said, but also like, and it becomes this human dignity space. He said, I've never begged anybody for anything in my life, and it is hard for me to think about begging for my life. And that's what he kind of felt clemency was. And I was like, well, good news. It'd be me doing the begging, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In that space. But also knowing who Rocky is, what we talked about was that, clemency is unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
In Alabama, clemency has been granted in what we call the modern era of the death penalty. So post late 70s to now, clemency has only been granted a single time in Alabama. And that was on Governor Fob James's last day in office to a white woman. So that is the only time clemency has been granted.
Wow.
Whereas, like, you compare it to some other states in Texas and Oklahoma, which are not liberal spaces, but you have multiple grants of clemency in those spaces. I'm not saying like people are walking out the door by the dozen or anything like that.
Yeah.
But there are clemency grants.
Yeah.
And it's really shocking for Alabama to have only a single clemency grant, like that there's never been anybody worthy in that space. But in talking with Rocky, one of the important things was that even though like we know clemency is a long shot, the important part is that helping people learn about your case in this very public way may help someone else.
Yeah.
It may change the system in some way. And I think that has been the biggest driving force for him, because Rocky has never wanted to die.
Yeah.
He wants to live. He wants to be able to have continued relationships with his family. It was just this process that was so scary and intimidating and anxiety-ridden for him.
Yeah.
And him getting this feeling like he is making a difference by letting people in to his personal life, into his personal situation, has created, again, like he said, this extended family.
Yeah.
He gets crazy letters And I mean, just crazy amounts, not
Oh, yeah,
Not
yeah,
the content.
just
crazy
huge
amounts,
amounts of correspondence from around the world.
Yeah.
Because people have heard about his case and heard about him, and want to reach out and tell him that they love him, that they
Yeah.
care about him, that they are praying for him.
Absolutely.
And so I cannot underestimate or undervalue reaching out, writing a letter to someone who's incarcerated. You don't have to become a lifelong pen pal to just put a little bit of hope in somebody's space. You never
Yeah.
know what a huge difference that makes.
Absolutely.
But sharing his story, again, like social media, one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
I've been amazed. I'm from Alabama, a lifelong Alabama resident. And I have family who are very supportive of the death penalty, who are very conservative. And in having one-on-one conversations with them, I have helped, I feel like move the needle about what really happens.
Yeah.
But also, my some of my family members have signed petitions for Rocky Myers
Yeah.
and things that they would have never done except for that personal one-on-one experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah. The social media, Miriam, did you want to shout that out?
Yeah, it is. It's Justice for Rocky M, and that's the number 4. And that is Twitter, Instagram. Clemency for Rocky Myers is Facebook. JusticeForRockyMyers.com is his website.
Wow. Well, thank you for coming on. This was a great conversation. Justice for Rocky Myers, through and through. Yeah. Do y'all want to say anything?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Rocky. He's literally one of my favorite people. And so I love having the opportunity to lift up who I think he is as a person. He is someone who is a clear survivor. He is someone who is incredibly resilient and literally maybe the kindest person I know.
Yeah.
And so I am always glad to have an opportunity to share those pieces of him, but also to talk about why we should fight really hard to save his life.
Yeah, for sure. Miriam, anything you want to leave off with?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that the state of Alabama does the right thing. But if they don't, I just want everybody to know that, they never broke Rocky's spirit. I think you're able to hear that on the phone call today. They never broke his faith in God or in people.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you for having us here. And I also, Khadidah, just want to thank you for all that you do. You're an incredible organizer and advocate, and thank you for having us here to share the space and talk about Rocky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was The South Got Something to Say. We had a lot to say today. Yeah, because y'all the South, I'm the South, we all the South. So see y'all next time. Bye.